I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone to say that there was a lot more energy in this debate. There was a degree of more drama in this debate. I mean, there was, I think, two individuals who, in some ways, we see why they're not running for the presidency. There's an annoying element to both of them. Biden, a degree of personal confidence, his constant smiling. Some people see Joe Biden as a champion of the working people in America. Other people see him as a bit of a blowhard, and you can see why that is. Paul Ryan, a lot of detail he tried to get into, but also a rather annoying persona, I'd say, for a number of people in the way that he presented himself. I think there was a lot of details in this debate that will be thrashed over, particularly this kind of contrast that Biden was, I think, very keen to point out that he was a man that believed in something which was quite different to what you might call Reaganomics, or a kind of trickle-down approach to the economy, that he was someone who believed in helping the middle class a lot more. Ryan has got fairly dramatic ideas on the economy, ideas that probably go back to the Reagan period in terms of their intellectual sort of origins, and has ideas which I think, to a degree, you can run a fairly effective scare campaign against, particularly on this issue of Medicare. The last point I'd make is that the debate on foreign policy, I think, was very interesting at certain moments. I thought Biden did quite a good job of hosing down fear about Iran and saying, look, Iran isn't on the verge of creating war in the Middle East. It won't even have a nuclear weapon for quite some time, and let's hold back here. Let's not get overexcited. What I thought was quite disappointing about the foreign policy debate was there was quite a difference to Benjamin Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu, they both talked about, Biden called him his friend. He's probably one of the most destructive actors in world politics at the moment in terms of a responsibility about, how you might have better relations in the Middle East. So that difference, I think, tells you something pretty significant about the Jewish influence in American politics. And I say this, with a great deal of concern for the future of Israel. But I think that difference to Netanyahu, for many outsiders, would be relatively galling. Michael?
Look, I thought it was a much better debate than the first one. That was the first thing. I thought there were more ideas discussed. I felt the main message that I take away from that is that Joe Biden made a powerful argument for liberalism. He was saying, I think, with much more strength and much more pride, what the administration of the last 3.5 years has accomplished. He owned it in a way that Barack Obama didn't appear to last week. I do think there's something about that smile. I thought he was going to sink those teeth into Paul Ryan's neck or something like that, but and I wasn't sure whether he had been trained or counselled to do that. One of the other major things I take away from this debate is the difference in the way that Biden debated Ryan as opposed to Sarah Palin 4 years ago. There was certainly none of that laughing and sneering at Sarah Palin 4 years ago, and I think there was perhaps a strategy to show or to expose Paul Ryan as out of his depth and as inexperienced. And I felt at times on foreign policy that actually was shown to be the case. When Biden pushed Ryan hard on some of the detail, Ryan was good for a while, but I think he stumbled a little bit on Afghanistan in particular. Asking him for specifics, whether it was on domestic policy or foreign policy, this distinguished Biden's approach to Obama's approach last week. He asked him, I think specifically at one point, to fill in the details, and I think Ryan at times struggled, and I think he struggled because the Republican would-be alternative president-vice president combination is in a little bit of an identity crisis at the moment, in that they have Romney last week pivoting a little bit towards the centre, but with a running mate who's cut his teeth as a fairly hardcore Republican conservative ideologue in 7 terms in the Congress. And I think therein lies a little bit of the problem. And I think the strategy of Biden today was actually to try and wedge the two men on the Republican ticket. I think at times he could have done that more effectively than he did, but you'll note that he spoke certainly on a number of occasions about the 47% comment. I thought Paul Ryan came back with a fairly clever response, to Joe Biden that elicited a lot of laughter, that sometimes people say things that they don't mean, Joe, and of course you're the best example of that. So I felt that there was a concerted effort to take the fight up to Paul Ryan in a way that we didn't see last week with Barack Obama. The other issue that surprised me that didn't come up last week that came up today at the end of the debate was abortion. One of the big things that I think happened after the debate last week was the narrowing of the gap in women's support for the two candidates. I think Joe Biden sought to show very clearly that, again, there is a bit of a division between Romney's position, the Romney administration, the would-be Romney administration's position on abortion, and the line that Paul Ryan has been advocating for 7 terms in Congress. So there's some initial impressions that I have of this debate. I think one of the things I was saying actually to Brendon beforehand, that civility is a wonderful thing in politics up to a point, but sometimes it gets in the way of a rigorous engagement with ideas and arguments, which I think are essential to a vital democracy. And I think today or tonight, we've seen a far more vital debate than the one we saw last week.
Yeah, a lot more energy. I mean, the last point I'd make before I'd open it to questions would be the most positive read on last week's debate in terms of Obama's performance might have been that Obama opened a series of questions about Romney's policies that he might be able to, make good sort of hay on in the second and third debate. And I think the issue that at least Obama opened up in that first debate was, where are you going to find these tax savings from? Where are the loopholes? Where are those, high income earners who are finding ways of not paying, maybe enough tax? And this came up quite a bit in tonight's debate. And Ryan, once again, as Romney was in the position of doing, says, well, we're not going to tell you the details. Now, this is a lot of money, billions of dollars at the centre of their campaign. And I think this will be sort of hit upon constantly in the second and third presidential debates. And a certain momentum might build to say, look, this sounds a bit like Richard Nixon's secret plan to end the Vietnam War. We need to know something. Anyway, I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts. We'd be very interested in your questions. So does someone want to start us off with a question?
It was very interesting to see how strong Biden came out on the 201 pull-out, but then he built that up by saying the Afghans are responsible from now on. And the line was very positive for him after that, both men and women, that enough's enough in Afghanistan. And they never make the point, yes, you make a pull-out date, but say if you made it no pull-out date, there's still going to be an eventual end, and if they're holding fire, the Taliban, they will eventually come back, even if it's 10, 15. The solution will be how strong Afghanistan can be with what's there. So it looks like a winner for that particular point, that they won't be able to play the defence thing as strong.
What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think they have a very clear sense that the American public, after more than a decade of war, is tired of it, and are mindful of the economic costs involved in sort of staying the course, to use the phrase that's been bandied around over the past few years. I take your point that there will always be problems there, and so I think you do have to have a timetable in this case. What I thought was really interesting, though, was Biden's determination to tie Afghanistan to the economy. In other words, by taking a firm stance on the withdrawal date, we're going to be saving money as well. So this is not just about foreign policy, there's a domestic policy dimension to this point.
I mean, one of the really interesting things about this campaign has been that Obama started with a real advantage on foreign policy. American people in polls trusted Obama on foreign policy a lot more than they did Mitt Romney. And this is quite unusual. Usually, Democrats are struggling on foreign policy. It's on domestic issues, on protecting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, where Democrats are really stronger than Republicans. the events in the Middle East, and particularly in Northern Africa in recent times, have probably, or at least made complications for that narrative of Obama as the foreign policy lead or as a foreign policy advantage. And I think the Romney-Ryan campaign, it was very interesting how the debate started very hard on this issue of have the Obama-Biden administration not told the American people the truth about the death of that American ambassador. And that was a tough place to start for Biden in the debate. And it is probably to a degree taken a little bit of the shine off Obama talking constantly, and Biden also, about how they were the ones who got Osama bin Laden and have made the world a better place. There was a question there.
With Romney, if I can compare him to Malcolm Turnbull, both are worth $250 million and have an issue with relating to everyday people. Would you say Paul Ryan would be a good person for that?
Sorry, a good person for?
For relating to the everyday American.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about only last week is that both Joe Biden and Paul Ryan have the potential and very often do speak a kind of authentic language of politics that sometimes is lacking in both Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. They speak less in terms of abstraction, more in terms of hard, on-the-ground, grassroots sort of detail. And I think, again, that came out tonight in the personal ways that the candidates spoke about themselves and their families and their communities. And I felt that the language was more sort of organic, if I can use that word. Can I also just say that I agree wholeheartedly with Brendon's point about the events in North Africa and the Middle East changing the nature of the debate over foreign policy to some degree. And I think it's been 50 years or so the last time that a Democratic candidate had ascendancy in foreign policy. And so this was quite different. I mean, I think Lyndon Johnson probably in 1964 was the last time a Democratic president had any ascendancy in foreign policy over a Republican. That's just another observation I'd throw in.
There's a question there.
I think the important thing to remember about this debate, it's not actually about policy, it's about convincing the voter to put their vote for you rather than the other guy. Now, my first observation when I came in was the look of Biden and Ryan. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they have the same background screen, which is I think the US Declaration of Independence, but Biden's was a lot darker than Ryan's, point one. Point two, Ryan's shirt was a lot crisper and whiter than Biden's. No, it makes a lot, people make a lot of the decisions not on analysis, but on perception. Come the day, they'll put their vote for either A or B. I noticed the star that Ryan was wearing was a lot more prominent and a lot flatter to the screen, whereas Biden's you could barely see. Now, for a lot of people, they go, I don't understand all this stuff, but gee, I like him. I worked for many years for the AEC, Australia Commission, and it's WEC, and people come in and they say, I've got to vote. This guy will do. And people will base a lot of their decisions on perception and emotion and not on analysis. My second point is, I think both Ryan and Biden knew who won that. Biden was getting very concerned. Three times he said, I want equal time with Ryan. 3 times. He was also continually interrupting Ryan a lot more than Ryan interrupted Biden. If you actually look at the time clock, Biden actually got 2 more minutes than Ryan. But Biden, the reason he thought is he was stressed. He knows he lost it, and Ryan also knows that he won it. I also noticed that Biden started arguing with the moderator, which is not a good idea. Do not argue with him. I think that was easily a Ryan win.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the stress that Biden might have had to a degree is a bit like fighting the last war. I mean, in partly he was fighting the last debate. He was wanting to change the narrative, wanting to obviously up the energy. Everyone talking about how many Red Bulls Joe Biden had before the debate on the kind of Twitter commentary I was looking at. And that's always a danger because you can overcompensate. I mean, Al Gore classically did this in the year 2000, where he had a very aggressive first debate. He was sighing all the time. He was looking at George W. Bush like George W. Bush was a knucklehead. And in the second debate, he was very passive. He was very civil, and it made Al Gore look like he was a changeable personality, which was a narrative that was already existing. On the point that people make about this kind of being in touch with the regular voter, I mean, I think Michael's point is a very good one. Biden was chosen because he was going to be able to speak to communities like where he'd come from in Scranton, Pennsylvania, to hopefully sort of white working class Americans, was this kind of, you know, to put it bluntly, a demographic appeal. Both of them talked a lot about where they came from Struggle Street, basically, these towns which are not sort of, you know, some of America's most scenic or interesting places to go as a tourist. But I think with both of them there's problems with that, and with Ryan the particular problem is that he is a bit of a policy wonk. I mean, he's on the budget committee. I think he loves that kind of budget stuff. That's where he is most comfortable. So the sense that, for me, that either of them are particularly genuine or authentic, that's a little bit of a stretch. But, you know, politics in different nationalities is always, I think, for the outsiders, an interesting case of trying to understand it from the inside.
Look, I take your point that symbolism and style is important to some degree in politics. There's no doubt about that at all. I'm not so sure, though, that I agree, yet anyway, that Ryan knew he won the debate and Biden knew he had lost it, and that will be the judgment of others as well. I think there was a determined or a concerted strategy for Biden to be aggressive, to do the interrupting, to speak up for the Obama record in a way that the president didn't do last week. And it is, you know, it's a matter of striking that balance between sort of the Al Gore position. And say, for example, I think a very appropriate comparison is Dick Cheney in 2004, where President Bush loses the first debate to John Kerry, loses the momentum, and then it falls to Cheney to get a bit of that momentum back against John Edwards, and he did it very well, I have to say, in 2004. And I think that was a critical moment in the 2004 campaign. So I think Biden's brief here was to do a Cheney, but in 2012. I'm not sure that he did a Cheney, but I don't think that it was an Al Gore-style performance either. And I certainly wouldn't call it for Ryan just yet.
There's a question just behind.
I was just going to ask, as we've now been talking about, we know that going to the first presidential debate, the onus was on Romney to make up ground. And Obama, while he perhaps could have finished Romney off and the election off in that night, instead chose to sort of play the conservative card and go more on the defensive. He knew he already had the momentum. Everything was switched, obviously, with this debate. We know, in retrospect, that Obama was too passive, and the onus was, as you just said, on Biden to make up the ground, and that's why he was so impassioned from the start. We know that Obama was too passive. Do you think Ryan did enough to keep the momentum with the Republicans over the next week? Obviously, it's going to depend a lot on how the media and how they're going to spin this whole debate.
Yeah, I think there's going to be an enormous amount of anticipation for that second debate. And I think it's hard being the sitting president and getting involved in these debates. The challenger does tend to do pretty well against an incumbent president. A lot of people look back, and particularly in America, on Ronald Reagan as a great hero, a great speaker. But Ronald Reagan had one of the worst debate performances ever in 1984 and won an enormous landslide election. His first debate performance, people started to think, this guy Reagan maybe isn't really up to it. He's looking too old. He's looking like he's just not on top of the details. And he came back in a second debate and he had this sort of killer line about how he wasn't going to hold Mondale's age against him. And it turned momentum in many ways, and people said, okay, the president just had an off night. And I think that there's the capacity for that narrative again to be, after next week's second presidential debate, for people to say, okay, Obama's allowed an off night, but we know this guy can really perform when he gets his act together. The interesting sort of insider stories from Washington are that Obama's really been struggling in the debate preparation sort of that's been going on before these debates, whether he's got to the stage where campaigning is being seen by him as a little bit passé, is a little bit sort of 2008 and I've done that, and he just wants to get on with being president. I think that is a bit of a problem for Obama, that he's not switched gears entirely back to the mode of campaigning, and in some ways, there's not a second act in this kind of performance to his, very, very talented 2008 performance.
I think it's a one-trick pony. He's got one trump card and that's it. And once you play that trump card, you can't pull that out.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that, with incumbency comes many advantages, but with incumbency comes disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages is that you're running against your opponent, but you're also running against yourself in the Oval Office for the past 4 years. And I think that came across in last week's debate, that Romney was excited to be there, he had ideas, he was vigorous in the way that he made his case, and I think I said, excited to be on stage putting his agenda to the American people, whereas Obama, I thought, looked jaded, he looked distracted. Again, that also may reflect the fact that he's also being the president as he's campaigning. This is something that Romney doesn't have to think about. So there are advantages with incumbents too. I'm not suggesting that that there aren't for a minute, but there certainly are disadvantages, and that often gets missed.
We'll see if question over at the back.
My question is basically, what do both the panelists think is the influence of personal moral issues and abortion in swing votes for the debate?
I mean, that was interesting how Biden, when he was asked about his personal faith, kind of went into almost a dramatic sort of pose, leaned down, sort of curled into himself. There was more theatre there all the time tonight, and Biden is a man that, we saw, some of us might have been here for his convention speech that he gave, full of energy and bluster. And I suppose when they were both talking about abortion, I think it very much comes back in terms of Biden's approach to what Michael said earlier about the gender gap, that women in the United States have favoured the Democratic Party by quite a considerable margin, 5, 8, 10% even in certain polls this time, around 12%, which is quite extraordinary. Women and men usually vote in fairly similar ways in most democracies. And so the Democrats have realised this very much so since about 1992, that talking about being pro-choice is very good for them in terms of the female vote in America, and for all the energy that Christian conservatives give the Republican Party and these hard lines on abortion give the Republican Party in terms of fundraising, it also turns off a lot of voters. There's a backlash. And so there was quite a few moments where there was quite a stark contrast tonight, and that was one of them, I think.
I would agree, and usually up until a week and a half ago, up until the first presidential debate, I would have said, abortion will play a role, but a minimal role in this election. But as the gap has narrowed in the last week between the two candidates, I think every twist and turn takes on sort of new significance. And I think Brendon's absolutely right about those numbers, 10 to 12% difference in certain places. The Democrats have obviously decided that this is something to go hard on. The issue of same-sex marriage didn't come up. That's another hot-button cultural issue, if you like. I was surprised that Biden didn't make more of those unemployment figures recently, that they've come down, just to pivot to something else now, to 7.8%. But I thought his point, again, to call Ryan on, I wouldn't say his hypocrisy, but the contradictions in his position over the last decade, and the position that he put forward today as the running mate on the Romney ticket was important.
Do we have one last question, and then we probably should get going? Is anyone else who hasn't asked a question?
Just a request, rather. Can we have a straw poll here of who thinks, not necessarily who won, but did the Democrats' cause be helped by today or not?
Well, you're welcome to have that. Who thinks that the Democratic cause improved by today's debate? So I think most people in the room probably, as I said last week, these aren't really entirely debates. They're competing speeches in some ways, dueling speeches. Their performances of the degree of question, as suggested before, of tone and style, and the analysis of the press. I think it often gets a sort of a bit of a pack mentality. So I think there's probably an exaggeration about how bad Obama was last week. For most people who didn't watch the debate, you would have thought Obama was sort of almost catatonic in his presentation from some of the press reports. I think things tend to sort of go in a kind of herd way, and then sort of there's a correction in a lot of this.
Yeah, can I just say on that point, I didn't think Obama's performance was particularly good last week. And 1/3 of the problems that have come the Democratic Party's way this week, I think, are a result of that performance. The other 2/3 I would attribute to Democratic Party supporters who have dumped on Obama for his performance and have actually publicised day in and day out the president's weaknesses last week. I think that has been a huge contributing factor to creating this perception, or fueling the perception, that Obama is asleep at the wheel, and I think he was parodied on Saturday Night Live as falling asleep at the lectern during the debate with Romney. So that's another point I would add. And if I can just say one other thing, the economy will, I think, continue to figure very prominently over the next few weeks. I thought a really interesting point during the debate was when Joe Biden muscled up to Paul Ryan on stimulus, and he said, you are opposed to stimulus, and yet those 2 letters that I received. Now, I go back to the point about symbolism. Now, that in itself is not a game changer in the election, but I think it's a significant point that will get people thinking about what the Republican team is actually bringing to the political table in this election, and the extent to which they're prepared to compromise, the extent to which they're ideologues or not, pragmatists, and I think that was one of the other narratives running through this debate.